Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session. My name is Diane Riley, and as the president of Carson and Saint, it's my privilege to host today's discussion. So with 25 years in the cybersecurity field, Carson and Saint provides comprehensive cybersecurity service and product solutions. Our services span from security advisory, regulatory compliance, risk management, incident response, and more. And our hallmark product is our award-winning Saint Security Suite, which is a risk-based vulnerability management solution. So today, we're going to focus on security best practices for credit unions, emphasizing the critical balance between being lean and secure, and the unique challenges that the credit unions face with limited resources, the stringent compliance requirements, escalating cyber threats, third-party risks, and the constant drive for efficiency truly demand innovative solutions. So the question is, how can credit unions enhance security measures while maximizing resource efficiency? How do we remain lean and yet secure? So today, I encourage your participation, ask the questions, share your thoughts, and engage in dialogue. And thank you so much for joining us today. I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Fred Scholl. Fred is a cybersecurity thought leader and innovator who is passionate about enabling success for people and businesses. His 33 years of experience ranges from the server room to the boardroom. He's currently serving as the Program Director of Cybersecurity and Associate Teaching Professor at Quinnipiac University, where he oversees the cybersecurity academic program. He holds a number of security certifications. He's a graduate of Cornell University and also holds a PhD in electrical engineering. Fred, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks very much, Diane, and thanks everybody for joining this. So I'm excited to talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework. You've probably heard about it. It was first launched 10 years ago, but what's happened in the past few months is an update, the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. There are a number of applications of the 2.0 version of the cybersecurity framework to credit unions. And so that's what I want to talk about. I'll talk a little about the cybersecurity framework as a whole, but I want to focus on the 2.0 updates and how they can help credit unions achieve the things that Diane was talking about, namely doing more with less and staying secure. And also, there's always compliance. We need to be compliant. So let me start with credit unions are unique, and they have particular vulnerabilities that they need to deal with. One is they tend to be more open and have accessible business practices. The second point is there's, like everybody, there's more and more reliance on third parties, including cloud vendors, other software vendors. And so this basically doesn't eliminate the risk. It moves the risk into those third parties, which need to be managed. The third bullet point is credit unions are obviously nonprofits, so they have more resource constraints than many other types of organizations. And the last bullet point, I talk about process automation. While this is a critical way to reduce costs and improve efficiency, many nonprofits, including credit unions, have not done as much as they could do in terms of internal process automation. Basically, credit unions are in the crosshairs of attackers just as much as any large money center bank. So I just put on one slide here some of the attacks that have been reported over the past few years. And you see the same things that affect large organizations also affect credit unions, like the ransomware attack at a cloud vendor up in the top right that affected 60 credit unions. You see a couple of examples of insider threats here. The most horrific one was the one who had been terminated at a credit union, and then after she left the organization, she went back and logged in and deleted, as it says here, 20 gigabytes of data. There's the MOVEit saga, the software vulnerability that affected many organizations, including credit unions. And then the bottom three here really show are legal. So First Financial of New Mexico just settled a data breach issue for 1.5 million approximately. And then there are two other lawsuits here, Ventura County Credit Union, Hawaii FCU. So if you have a security issue, you are likely going to get some type of attack from lawyers. It's just too easy. And then the one that's hard to read here is another vulnerability found in a common web content management system that credit unions are using. So the same issues and threats that affect big companies affect credit unions. And just to kind of summarize what these risks are: class action lawsuits, process management, and for example, the case of the woman who logged in remotely, immature processes for identity. Employee training may be inadequate. Do we have role-based training? Insiders are, we'd like to think credit unions are small, family-oriented, but some of them aren't so small. Medium and large credit unions are as big as banks, so they may have insider issues. And then the next to the last bullet point, third-party software and services is becoming bigger, as I said. And then also now disclosure processes, both from NCUA and just from best practices in disclosing to your business partners and members, and also CISO is coming out with new disclosure requirements. So that's another issue. So just overall, so the CSF, the cybersecurity framework as a whole, plus the new 2.0 additions help credit unions meet their cybersecurity goals in both compliance. They provide an internal framework that's mapped to pretty much all of the external requirements that you're going to have. They mitigate. The CSF is flexible enough so that you can mitigate your own unique risks. It's also very focused on continuous improvement. So if we want to be agile, we need to constantly be improving our security program, and that's built into the cybersecurity framework. And also doing more with less. If you follow a structured management framework like the CSF, you're going to have defined roles and responsibilities. You're going to have prioritization around risk. And all this is going to make your operation more effective, more cost effective, and better able to manage the risks, the changing risks that are out there. So the 2.0 update, just a quick overview of that. So it was February 26, 2024. The updates are applicable to credit unions, large or small. And so this is another bullet point 3 is just what I talked about before. You can use the CSF to communicate with your auditors who are coming in with their specific regulations, and it's a non-technical document, really. You can use it to communicate with your executive leadership. It's a good way of showing, here's what we have in terms of security management, and here are the gaps, and here's what we need to close those gaps. So I think bullet point 3 is extremely helpful for all organizations, especially credit unions. And so I'm going to talk about in the rest of the next few slides, what are the changes to CSF 2.0 and how to apply those to credit unions. And the last bullet point talks about another new addition to the CSF 2.0. It's their QSG, they call it their Quick Start Guide, and it's aimed at small and medium businesses. So primarily smaller credit unions. And I plan to talk about how that will help the smaller credit unions later on. But for now, let's go to the next slide, please. So actually, this is a survey for people. We'd love to have through, if you can respond in the chat, how are people using the NIST CSF? You could respond with an A if you're not using it, with a B if you're just starting to use it, C if you have a mature deployment, and D if you consider you and your organization is an expert in using the CSF. We'd love to see what kind of feedback we get. All right, so pretty much everybody's using it. That's good news. So I got mostly C's, and I think people with a mature deployment, we'll be able to implement the recommendations in the 2.0. And then B, I got one B in this response. So I think it's probably good to go back and look at the initial document and add in the 2.0 as needed. So the 2.0 has mainly management recommendations, and they talk. So one, I'm kind of summarizing. I'm not going into all the specific details of actual control objectives that they have. But what they're talking about here is talk about cybersecurity in context. They're talking about improved risk management practices, improved supply chain risk management practices. They also added in a new category called continuous improvement, which might seem surprising. This has always been built in to the cybersecurity framework, but I think there's a tendency for people, you go, you do an assessment, you see where you are in the framework, and then you kind of stay there. So there's a new category that really is mandating that organizations move up to the next tier. And then the last one is incident response. You know, everybody's going to get attacked in some way sooner or later. So they have recommendations on improving incident response processes, which I'll get to. So let's go into some of the details. So in terms of putting cybersecurity in context, this is the concept of moving cybersecurity beyond an IT function and moving it beyond the formal security team. It's really moving it out into the business and engaging internal and external stakeholders and their requirements. And I thought one way of doing that is to look at the flow of data in your organization. You should have a data flow map. You should know where the data is going. And I think everybody who touches that sensitive data is going to be a stakeholder and also a member of your security team. And one of the other points that's made in CSF 2.0 is document and define all the different methods of communicating risk. This is from another NIST document on risk management. I like this document. It shows how risks and vulnerabilities really are at all different levels. The tier 1 is the organization level, where you have tone at the top, down to tier 3, where you have vulnerability scanning and you have patching going on. And so this diagram emphasizes these two arrows on the upward arrow and down arrow. This is the communication feedback. The people in tier 3 need to figure out a way to communicate with the tier 1 management so they can understand what risks are really out there. And the same thing for this downward arrow on the left. The executives need to be able to communicate what is the risk policy, how are we going to handle risk. So this diagram emphasizes communication in a way that I think the CSF 2.0 is doing, and is really an important consideration for anybody managing risk. So let's go on to the next slide. Is about the same kind of thing, context. Here it's talking about put risk management in an organizational context. So it's not just something that the IT security team is going to look at risks and figure out what they should do about it. This is talking about aligning, especially bullet point 2 here is talking about aligning risk management with the business. So what are the benefits that to the business that the security program can enable? And this is a new category that got put into CSF. And I think this, how can you help the business meet its objectives through the security program? And at the same time, you want, on the risk side, you want to integrate cybersecurity risk management with enterprise risk management. You may have an individual person designated in charge of enterprise risk. You may not. It may be a group of people. In any case, you want to make sure that cybersecurity has a seat at that table. We've always talked about cybersecurity needs a seat at the table in terms of the boardroom. It also needs a seat at the table in terms of enterprise risk management, because it affects so many other categories like reputational and legal. They're all affected by cybersecurity. And then the last point here is don't just look at cyber risks as point processes. Make sure you have a process for managing risk. Are you going to manage it internally? Are you going to accept it? Are you going to use an insurance model? So exactly how is risk going to be managed? So that's what CSF's talking about on this topic. Supply chain. So this is a difficult topic because it involves many people in the organization. The first bullet point is document suppliers and their risk profile. Do you know who your suppliers are? And in many cases, you're going to have shadow IT. You may have shadow business processes that are being set up with vendors that you don't know about. You need to understand what data they have and what access to your systems do they have. And what you want to do is work with procurement and make sure that in the procurement process, you can do an effective cybersecurity risk before bringing on new vendors. So it's a matter of communicating with procurement and coming up with an easy to use risk assessment profile that you can do before bringing on new vendors. It should depend on how big the vendors are, what data do they have, and what access do they have. And then this last point is very interesting. It talks about managing supplier risks across the life cycle. So it's one thing to bring in a vendor. What happens while the vendor's there? That brings up things like patch management for software. And the other thing is end of life. How do you terminate? If you terminate a vendor, how do you remove them from your systems? How do you get the data back? So I think it's worthwhile thinking about that at the beginning of the procurement process. Incident response. Everybody is going to be faced with an incident. You're going to have to deal with an attack. Hopefully it's not large, but you need to have an incident response process. And in the latest CSF, they talk about incident recovery. So people often mid-size or even larger credit unions probably have some type of third-party contract. If you get hit with ransomware or some other attack, you will likely have a firm available to come in and help manage that incident by isolating affected systems. And the last part of this is how do you restore those systems back to where they were? And so what this management recommendation is, if you bring in a third-party vendor or if you try to do it yourself, make sure that you've gone through the whole process, not just eradicating malware, not just segmenting off bad systems. How do you actually restore all the systems that you have? And if you're bringing in a third-party vendor, for example, for tabletop exercises, you should educate that vendor enough on what systems do you have so that if you do have some type of disaster, they can get the systems up and running as quickly as possible. So this is kind of my summary of looking at the CSF 2.0 and this CSF itself. So these are some of my takeaways. So everyone in the organization is both a stakeholder and defender. And this is a matter of communicating with all these different groups in the way that they need to be communicated with. Automation is critical. I think credit unions have certainly streamlined and digitized customer-facing apps. I think it's likely that a lot of the internal processes are not as automated as they could be. So look at ways of doing that. Then the continuous improvement plan. We've always known we should do this. Now, I think the way to make sure it gets done is align it with the business, which is going to be looking for new customers and new revenue opportunities. So align your continuous improvement plan with the business's continuous improvement plan. And then bullet point 4 is really track risks and vulnerabilities in your industry. Not all industries are the same. If you are in, attacks on other credit unions are going to be likely seen at your credit union. So find low-cost ways of keeping track of that information. And then I'm in the education business full-time, so I think training is critical. I've written in the past, we should abandon awareness training and really do role-based training for your employees, your executives, and your members. I think those are some of the key ways of staying secure, lean, and compliant. What is the maturity level overall of your cybersecurity framework, whether you use the CSF or not? So you could respond with A for, these are the 4 levels of the NIST CSF in terms of their maturity level. So they start with partial. They don't start with 0. They start with partial. B is risk informed. C, repeatable. 4, adaptive. I'm curious if anybody's gotten to adaptive. That would be really agile.
It looks like we have mostly C's, Fred.
Yeah, that's good. So that says there's room for improvements, but being at the repeatable level is excellent. That means documented processes, but that there still could be room for automating some of those processes as well and figuring out how to do it more efficiently. But that's good to see that we've got all those.
So Fred, I have a question. Can you expand more on how credit unions can benefit from implementing a framework like the cybersecurity framework?
Yeah,
How
the
does it
two,
benefit them?
so I think the two, well, there's several benefits. So one is it's a standardized framework that will enable you to achieve a secure organization with the minimum of overhead and pain. So it is a roadmap. It starts with the different tiers that we talked about. Tier 1, partial, you can move up to repeatable. So it gives you a roadmap to start at a, where you are. It will take you where you are and it will take you to the next level. So that's a critical aspect of it. Another critical aspect of it is it's mapped to pretty much all of the regulatory requirements that are out there. So if you have your maturity and your control objectives documented, you're going to be in a much better place for dealing with regulators. And the last thing is it gives you a standardized format that you can use to present to executives when you're looking for support for your security program. You can, so this is what we have, and these are the gaps we have according to this document that's been developed by hundreds of people under the auspices of the government.
Okay, well, next up we have Dan Ford. Dan is the Chief Information Security Officer at Jovia Financial Credit Union. He has 25 years of experience across many industry verticals. And Dan is a unique executive. He has the ability to help organizations intertwine their business strategy with their technology strategy, which is very key. And he's a turnaround expert and provides a unique blend of continuous improvement, innovation, and positive leadership and strategic thinking. And Dan also holds a number of security certifications, as well as an MBA in Master's in Forensic Science and Information Assurance. And Dan, on a personal note, he's also an award-winning distiller. So, which is very, very cool. So Dan, tell us how you have approached being more lean and secure at Jovia Credit Union.
Absolutely. Thank you, Diane. And I'd like to first just thank Carson Saint for putting these on. I think they're extremely valuable. I hope the audience gets a lot out of this. And please provide comments and feedback for us. So this way, if we do some more, we can provide content for what you're looking for. Why it's important to be trying to do more with less. There's no secret that cybersecurity talent is already hard to find. And keeping talented cybersecurity people is even harder because it's a very sought after tool set. There's limited and it's difficult. So I find that trying this concept of doing more with less keeps your employees engaged because you're using your most important asset, which is your people and their brain power, right? They have a tremendous amount of knowledge on the front line. They have a tremendous amount of ideas. They just need to be heard. So we can do this by implementing this concept more with less. Now, from a business perspective, especially if you're in the financial sector, There's no secret that we're in this inverse yield curve environment. And that means a lot of financial institutions are very risk adverse at this moment for lending. And if we're not lending, then we're not making interest income. So we have to try to find some ways then, if we're not making as much interest income as what we used to, we have to find ways to reduce expenses. So this is another reason to be doing more with less. But you can't do that unless your people are highly trained. And as Fred had mentioned, it's not just about general security awareness. We have to be doing role-based training. And in cybersecurity, my team trains a lot. It's mandatory to work for me that you are doing 2 hours on the job training per week. And I tell my manager, you only get to schedule your people for 38 hours because 2 hours is mine. So when we're looking at resource allocation for projects, there's only 38 hours that they get to use because 2 hours is mine. I'm giving it to them for them to improve. Now, what do those employees have to do to kind of validate that they're using this 2 hours? Just want a little log. Tell me what you're working on. I meet with all of my employees at least quarterly, one-on-one, depending on what level in the organization they are. It might be monthly, it might be every other week, it might be weekly. That's what I schedule. However, they can meet with me whenever they want. They just have to, my calendar's always up to date. They just put something on the calendar. And, I just tell them, book no more than 30 minutes because we're going to keep it to 25. I'd like to ensure that meetings are at 25 minutes or 50 minutes because I want efficiency. With a lot of people, everyone is kind of overburdened with meetings. So I want a little bit of space in between there so we can go get coffee, bio breaks, whatever have you. So we can be focused on what is that training. And then that leads, and I didn't put these in any order, but collaboration. We meet not just with the cybersecurity team, but also our counterparts in IT to collaborate. We talk about everything. And in these meetings, there's no blame. Like we really, my counterpart, our chief technology officer, we try to do an extremely good job on making sure everyone's egos are kind of checked at the door, because it shouldn't be a blame game. We need to improve. When we talk about continuous improvement, the only way that happens is with direct, honest feedback that is professional and never personal. And that can be challenging at times because we put a lot of our effort into these projects and solving problems, and it could seem personal at times. So it's difficult, but I think we've created a safe place for everyone to kind of do that. It's really helped Jovia grow on that, not just from a cybersecurity maturity, but even technology. We find problems before our members and our employees do. And we prioritize. It's difficult to prioritize. We know what the business plan says, and there's a lot of people that put a lot of ideas out there, but almost every item within our business plan involves technology and cybersecurity. So sometimes we have to let them know this is what we can get done in order to be able to solve the business problems while maintaining the risk level that the board has accepted and making sure that our service level agreements are remaining intact. All of these things, when you're trying to do it, ends up with your organization being more efficient. Automate, automate, automate. So I kind of told you how much time I dedicate for my staff, and I actually didn't tell the entire story because I believe there's a little bit more, especially in cybersecurity. Every other Friday, they also get 4 hours dedicated. Now they rotate because half the team will be focused in the morning on improvement, and the other half is in the afternoon. They also get to split that. They can also work on that as part of that 4 hours, 2 hours on something personal to develop in them, whether it be about speaking, it could be ballroom dancing. It doesn't matter to me. But the requirement is you have to tell me how you can use whatever you're working on personally, how you can relate that to cybersecurity. And the reason I do this is because I'm teaching them to take very complex ideas and put them into real world what everyday people might understand. Because it's easy to sound intelligent, but I think it was Albert Einstein that said, if you can't explain it simply enough, then you simply don't know it well enough. I think it was Albert Einstein. And I really believe that. So I want them to focus on those things. And they kind of write a little paper, 1 page, and they share it with the team. It could be a PowerPoint in our monthly, one of our monthly meetings where we talk about, okay, well, what did you do? And I feel that's important. One, it helps them personally develop, but it's also getting them ways in which they have to explain a very technical concept using examples from something that has nothing to do with cybersecurity. So I'm curious for everyone out there, are you dedicating time for your staff? And if so, how many hours per week? So if you're looking for some training resources, maybe you already know about these, maybe you don't, but CISA has a lot of training exercises. There's Cybrary, there's Udemy. You could always do internal knowledge sharing and training sessions, which we do quite often inside of Jovia. We have the cybersecurity team is always teaching our IT team on what we're doing, because it's also great because they will poke holes in it. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Which we want. We want everything that we are doing to be challenged because it makes us better. So another one of these, I put EC Council in there. I feel like this is the best deal in town when it comes to cybersecurity training. It's called I think it's called the iClub or something along those lines. It's on their website. It's $3,000 for the first year, and you get unlimited training, unlimited certifications. Now you can only take one class at a time. So until you finish that class, you can't take the next class. But then every year thereafter, it's just $1,000. So it's a very cost-effective way of getting your people certified and trained. Now, from there, we got to figure out how they can put that into the real world. And that's where I believe that continuous improvement comes about, right? If they're highly trained, then they're going to find ways to automate. Another way in which you could do this, and this is what I use, is I get my people into Six Sigma, not official certification training. They can certainly do it, but LinkedIn Learning has quite a bit on Six Sigma. This is a way for process improvement. So if you need a framework, you're not really quite sure how to start, I think that's a great one. What I like to do as a manager, and I like to say I'm a leader, but I always feel it's much better when someone else says that I'm a leader. I use Jeff DeGraff's book called The Innovation Code. It's another pseudoscience like personality test, but it lets you know how do your people prefer to innovate. You have those that are sages, that's the yellow. Those are the ones that like to build teams. That's kind of where I fall in line. I like to get the team built, and then they're going to come up with great ideas, and then I can help them accomplish what their goals are. You have blue, which is the athlete. It's like they love to find ideas, and once they find it, they are just go. Love working with those people because you never have to push them to try to do something. You have to rein them in because they want to move fast. Love working with those when they call them athletes here, and with this book. Green are your artists. They love to just come up with great ideas. And then you've got your engineers, which are red. Those are the ones that would probably, in my mind, really gravitate towards the Six Sigma. They want to take the processes you have in place and then improve them. They're looking to reduce essentially wasted efforts, things that might be duplicative. They're going to find a better way to do things with what you already have. Now, the great part is if you can actually get all of these people on your team, you're going to create naturally some healthy conflict. And that is great because all of these people are not going to think alike. When you start talking about DEI, diversity, especially diversity of thought, to me, this is a great path because it's about what people gravitate towards. Do they like to build teams? Do they like to run with the ideas once they have it? Do they like to come up with the ideas? Or are they a process improver? And they work quite well together when you get them in that safe space. So now here we are. I got the basis of what we're going, but how do we do this in a cybersecurity? Well, we know that not all threats are created equal. We see this because we're hit over the head with it on a regular basis. CISA, NIST with CVSS. So we also only have so many FTE hours at our disposal. We have to move from just patching for the patching's sake to patching based upon the vulnerabilities, prioritization as to whether or not it's going to be with the probability of that risk event occurring and causing a negative consequence for our organization. So you could do this in many different ways. You've got your vulnerability scannings, and then you're going to see what that is, but you should really be looking at it based upon what's the priority to your organization. So for example, I know there's going to be a Microsoft vulnerability that's going to affect my credit union on Microsoft Patch Tuesday. The challenge that I am presented with, as much as I would love to just roll that patch out everywhere, I know I'm not going to be able to. In part because we use Fiserv DNA, it's not going to be supported necessarily. We have to test. And so I'm always behind on my endpoint patching because I have to rely on third-party vendors to process our member data. If DNA goes down, then we can't process anything for our members. So that's not a good thing. Even though that's that is for us, that is the most critical system in the organization, but it doesn't mean I can just patch. We have to test. Now, once the testing is done and everything comes back, then of course we roll that out. On others, we have to take a look and we patch based upon its criticality. If it's what we call a mission critical system, we patch. This is where it also gets a little bit interesting. I'm not sure with you all in the audience, but I can tell you that our strategy is to move to more and more SaaS-based applications. Therefore, my vulnerabilities in terms of the overall landscape are going to be less and less over time as to what I can directly affect. So then how am I going to do this with third-party vendors? That's really the question. And there's some things that are out there that can help. There's Security Scorecard. They do something which can at least kind of monitor some of your third parties. If you're looking for one, there's one there. There's another one that I can't pronounce the name. I think it's called Panarias. They do something like that. They were actually introduced to me by our last speaker, Randy. We really kind of enjoyed that presentation. Risk assessments. It may sound like just a paperwork exercise, especially even with some that might be thinking the NIST CSF is a paperwork exercise. I assure you it is not. We tend to, in this industry, think that we know exactly what we need to do next. There's so many different variables when it comes to technology and cybersecurity, and utilizing the NIST CSF and these risk assessments, it's going to help build your roadmap and your maturity. Now, here's a pro tip for you. I use these things to justify my budget spent. I have a very good board. I have a really good CEO. I have a really good CFO. And as good as they are, they always want to know, why are we doing this and not that? And I feel like I do a pretty good job at looking horizontal across the organization to determine what has to be done versus what I would like to get done. I tend to only focus on what has to, because if I would like to do it, I'm going to do things that are going to be in this do more with less mentality. But I use these risk assessments and then this CSF to justify my spend, and it makes things that much simpler, especially when I'm almost always under an audit, whether it be the NCUA, PCI, or our internal audit uses a third party. So I feel like I'm almost always under an audit. So when I have these and I can demonstrate where we're at within our CSF journey through these risk assessments, it makes the audits much simpler, because I can essentially go, I've self-identified where my weaknesses are, and I have a plan of action and milestones as what is going to be done to address these over time. It makes my life very easy at that point. It wasn't fun doing them in the beginning because that's the hard work. But once we get into maintenance mode, my life as a CISO is that much simpler all the way across the board. Should be no surprise to know your enemy. I mean, we've been saying this since Sun Tzu, the Art of War, know your enemy. You also need to know yourself. And if you know both of those things, you're going to win way more than you're ever going to lose. And there's many ways to understand what your enemy, the cyber criminals, is attempting to do. Because we see this in the news. If you're not signed up for CISO alerts, I would strongly recommend you do that. I would also, if you're unable to afford direct cyber threat intelligence, you can always use Google Alerts and just put in all your vendors' names, put in all the types of systems that you're using. You're going to get alerted when there's a vulnerability. That vulnerability is what the cyber criminal is going to try to exploit. So you can absolutely understand what the motivations are of the criminal. And so you can put plans in place to disrupt their ability to do reconnaissance, their ability to exploit, if you have the knowledge of what they're going to try to do. So 100% focus on those things as much as you're possibly able to do. I spend a lot of time with my team teaching them these methods that I've learned over the course of my 25-year career. It's also fun for me to teach. We do a lot of tabletop exercises. Love tabletops. We just did one yesterday with the cybersecurity team where what happens if our email security provider goes down? Because we probably, like many of you, you have something like Proofpoint, and then either Office 365 or G Suite, whatever you might have. So you've got that two-tier system. Well, of course, so if our Proofpoint-like system goes down, I'm still got internal email, but I can't send email outside of the organization, nor can I receive any. Now, the good news for that, I don't have to worry about any phishing because nothing could get in. The bad news is now our members and possibly other partners aren't able to contact us. So what do? So we went through that whole picture. And of course, one of the gaps that came about is I just kind of listened. And towards the end, I just asked them, hey, at what point was someone going to pick up the phone and call me and let me know that our email was down? And they kind of all just looked around and said, it's great that we're focusing on the solution, but I have to be able to get our crisis management team involved. I have to inform them. And then from there, provide regular updates. And then I can develop that cadence with them and as well as our crisis management team. So it was just one of those, kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't think about notifying, because they wanted to immediately get into problem solve mode, which is great, but we've got a lot of people we have to notify, because right now, what we don't know in this particular case as we're going through the tabletop is, did our secure email provider, were they breached? Or is this just a technology issue? I don't know whether or not I need to inform my board yet, whether I have to inform the NCUA. So a whole lot of information goes on, but it was a good learning experience for them because I have a relatively inexperienced team at the moment, and that's there's good and bads to that. They're getting better every day, but and eventually they're going to be even better. They are a good group of people. So I really love threat hunting. This is, especially when you're trying to find ideas for tabletop exercises, look no further than the logs you already have or the vulnerability tools you already have. You can take any vulnerability that you're using in your vulnerability scanner and say, okay, what happens if this gets exploited? You can start coming up with scenarios in which every way in which your team believes that vulnerability could be exploited, and then from there determine the impact, determine whether or not your playbooks are up to date to whether or not to be able to address those things, because the most important thing in the event that you are compromised is how do you get back to whatever your new normal is. That recovery is the most important piece at that time, to get one, to make sure the attacker is gone, stop the attack, get back to your new norm. Those are kind of the marching orders for my team. Stop the attack, get back to new norm. And the new norm is to close out whatever that vulnerability is. I'd like to say it's it's not a matter of if you're going to be compromised, it's a matter of when, and when you do, how fast you close that threat window. And that's how I measure things. It's, thankfully, we've had a number of near misses. This is why we have defense in depth strategies. We make sure that in all areas of the kill chain, we have multiple vendors that are able to see pieces of that, and that helps out quite a bit. Another thing you could just check, your DNS records. You'd be surprised as to how much is in your DNS. I could tell you another little thing that is very likely to happen, and one of the ones that I did a tabletop with our executive team on this, and it's not necessarily directly cybersecurity related, and not everything has to be. But I just said, hey, we've got, I don't know how many vendors that are able to send emails on our behalf, but what happens if one of our vendors was to send out an email advertising a service, let's say a identity theft monitoring service, that is in direct conflict with one that we've already engaged with and that we have an exclusive, and it goes out to all of our membership. What do? First part was who approves any of these emails, and what we found out is that our marketing team doesn't necessarily approve all of it. We signed up with a service. They just get to do whatever is within their service. They have these DNS records, which allows them to send on our behalf, and not a whole lot. However, in this scenario, we have a reputation risk and we have a legal risk, and we have to work through that scenario. So I won't go into all those details, but you could come up with tabletops just looking at your DNS records. I think it was GrooveCar recently had something along these lines to where someone on the inside there was breached. They were able to do something, send out emails. It made it look like it was coming from GrooveCar. It really wasn't, but everything looked legit. Many different ways that you can find something to do with tabletop and make sure your playbooks are up to date on how to address them, because it's something that's going to happen. And the more you practice that negative event, the better prepared you're going to be at addressing it when it does happen. So I'm curious, are you all struggling with tabletop ideas? And do you run tabletops often? What is it that you all are doing in order to kind of practice these events? We have a goal at Jovia that every business department runs 2 tabletop exercises a year, and they document it. They send it up, because as part of my role as CISOs, I also am responsible for the whole business continuity plan for the organization, as well as I run the crisis management team. In the event any type of thing is deemed a crisis, I'm the one that runs that particular program. And so what I did, and if you have cyber insurance, I would talk to your cyber insurance companies, because there are a lot of things that they offer within your package. And one of the things that we chose this year was we had them come in and train all of our managers that would be a part of BCP. So they're responsible for their department heads, and train them on how to create tabletops, run tabletops, document lessons learned, how to do debriefs, things like that. It's quite valuable. They also do quite a bit of a number of other things, but I would really strongly encourage everyone to look at your cyber insurance companies, because there's a lot that they're going to offer to try to make sure your business runs as smoothly as possible, preventing a lot of things such as whether it be ransomware, you name it, as part of your package. And so that's why I chose the company that I did with this, because of what was included in the package. And thus far, the things that came along with that have been excellent. So if you were also struggling with some things and finding ideas, I would tell you, Saint has got some great things right in it. And so there's 2 different things here that you're looking at. One, hey, Saint puts a whole lot of stuff in the vulnerability management. They're also going to tell you if whether or not they already know of an exploit for that vulnerability. And so in my mind, the vulnerability might come out as a medium score. And I remember maybe 10 years ago, I think it was called Heartbleed. It was one with I think it was OpenSSL, and during that time, NIST had rated it as a medium, but exploits were available. And so if you were using OpenSSL, then you were likely leaking usernames and passwords. So for me, because that CVS is a kind of a baseline score, you have to take a look at how it affects your environment. And if it does, you can increase that score because the probability of it affecting you is now high because you have that piece of technology that is vulnerable and you don't have a patch. So you could look at that. Another one is I can't stress enough, the configuration management option with Saint is excellent. I specifically brought up one for Google Chrome because there's a lot of things in there. Now, you could pick your different SCAP profile that you want. I chose to use sensitive, which you can just go through and it's kind of like, okay, is my Google browser have all these things disabled, like the password manager? I don't want people storing their passwords in Google Chrome. We actually have a password manager. So, this way we know it is, it's more secure than a browser, but there's other things. You could just pick any one of those profiles in the configuration management and go, okay, are we implementing these things? And go look. And if not, now you have something else to add to your roadmap. So Saint provides a lot of tools. We use these tools at Jovia often. My team is in love with the product. It is it is a really a game changer, and no surprise that it's an award-winning product. So does your organization utilize any threat intelligence, anything specific, or Google Alerts? We use a couple different products inside of Jovia, as well as Google Alerts. I subscribe to CISA. Then we utilize, I'm always forgetting the name of it because it doesn't sound like a threat intel company, where, and of course it'll come to me at some point, but I love reading all the feeds as well as, and if a lot of these threat intelligence companies, it's helped us quite a bit with preventing fraud because it's looking also on the dark web. So we're able to do a lot of advance notice to our members because we will find their debit or credit card is being sold online. We can even go so far as to engage our threat intel company to try to find out more information from them. They will actually act like a buyer. It also helps us with taking down quite a bit of fraudulent domains because that's another way from the phishing aspect, or especially in today's the smishing, where they send you something that makes it look like it came from Jovia or your organization, and then the domain's a lookalike domain. So when they go to click on it, it actually looks like Jovia. So we find these things, and we, then we're able to take them down. Funny story, one of my engineers was going through that motions to help take down one of the ones, and I think he said it was in Hungarian. So of course he's using Google Translate to try to figure out how to call and take this down. And so it was really quite funny, as we were going through our team meeting, and I'm like, hey Isaac, what were you doing today? He's like, well, funny story, I've been using Google Translate to try to take down a domain it's in Hungary. So I've been doing this, and it's been taking me all morning but I finally found where I got to go, and waiting on a response back. So but we found these fraudulent domains through our threat intel. So I kind of just mentioned just there like how we actually use our threat intel. It is expensive. I'm not going to tell you that it's not, but I think it is 100% worth the money because we can be proactive in protecting our members. We can be proactive in addressing countermeasures for when we see a particular threat group that is looking to attack something. We can also use this where we put our vendors in there so we know if they've been attacked, and then we can be proactively reaching out to those vendors to find out whether or not Jovia was compromised as part of this, because this is one of the things from the NCUA, which happens to be, even if it's my third-party vendor that is breached, if it's Jovia data, the moment I find out Jovia data was compromised is my 72-hour window. So I don't want to wait on that vendor to tell me, because they may not tell me ever. I mean, I just be honest, they may not even know they've been breached. But if we start seeing it on the dark web chatter, then we reach out, and we have thankfully been able to tell some of our vendors that they were breached before they knew it, just because of the chatter, and they were able to get it. Thankfully, none of Jovia's data was compromised. I don't know if, I'm sure someone else's were, but we weren't. But we were able to help some of our own vendors find out that they were breached before they even knew it, just because of the chatter. And everything is based on how do we base everything on the impact and exploitability. And I just kind of mentioned it. We look at the vulnerability data. We're looking at threat intel. We're looking at things that are on Exploitability, just in case, if Saint doesn't have it in there yet at that time, we can get it from Exploitability, and then my engineers can craft that, utilize the attack framework that Saint has in order to be able to see if it's exploited, because this is a key thing. I'm not going to just patch because the vulnerability is there. I'm going to patch if the vulnerability can actually cause damage. So if my countermeasures are effective today, then I'm no longer saying that that's a high. I might say it's a medium, because the way we classify things gives our IT team a little bit more of a runway to get that patched. And so our mediums, we patch, I think, within like 3 months, something along those lines. It's either 3 or 6. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I can also grant exceptions to that. So if things aren't working correctly, or we continuously use this attack framework to ensure that the countermeasures are still effective. Because if the countermeasure is not effective, then I have to bump up the priority on there. My IT team only has a certain amount of FTE hours available. I really don't want them also working at 2 o'clock in the morning, because then who's going to be answering the phones at 9 o'clock in the morning? They need some sleep, just like we all do. So we try to really make sure we're focused on the right things for the credit union, our members, and our employees, to ensure that we are touching everything that we have to at that time. And it takes some negotiation, but it's not a be all end all. Like I said, I have a great relationship with our CTO, and we talk about it. We talk about what's the probability of this vulnerability getting exploited based on what we know. And I'm glad to say that when we're almost always in agreement, and even if we haven't been in direct agreement, our CTO goes, well, you're the expert, so we're going to go with your recommendation. That only happens based on having that great relationship. We talk about everything. We have a standard meeting every Thursday. I think we definitely talk most of those Thursdays, but we probably talk every day. And it's just because of that relationship. There's a mutual trust involved. Everyone in the industry talks about this alert fatigue. And what I stress to my team is, if I'm only seeing an alert in one avenue, I don't consider that true. Not yet. They can prove it to be true, but I really want them focusing on when we have multiple alerts coming from different technologies that are all reporting the same thing. So like I mentioned, I have multiple technologies in each area of the kill chain. And so if I'm getting 2 or more in that area saying that this is a problem, that's where my engineers start to focus. One could just be an outlier, but it might not. If it's repeated and we keep seeing it, then they start looking at it. But the first time might just be a blip on the radar. Second time, maybe want to pay attention to it. But if you got multiple technologies saying this is a problem, it's probably a problem. So we don't just go and just block. We look at what's the indicators for the reason that we are going to block, because we might find something else. And this is just another part that we tabletop as well. Okay, we saw this. Well, what's the next phase in the kill chain? What would it look like if we missed it on the recon side? What does it look like in the deploying of the package? What kind of alert will we get there? So we really spend a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out the path that exploit could take, and do we have all the right countermeasures at all areas of the kill chain? Another one, and this is going to cost a little bit of money, but this is what we have been spending a lot of our time, and we purchased a product a few years ago that is exactly this: user behavior analytics. We want to know what our users are doing and try to understand their behavior, because then it allows us to address the problem and come up with a solution before it gets worse. One of these ones that we found was a majority of our users were using Microsoft Excel as a password manager. I don't know about you all, but as last time I checked, Microsoft Excel was not a very secure document. And we found this due to our product that we're using, which led us to, well, let's just go buy a password manager. Let's find an enterprise password manager that can be used on all of their devices. And we even just say anyone in their household. Like we basically offer the password manager to anyone in their home. So we'll pay for it because we want them all to be secure. You can't just, in our minds, we don't want to just make sure an employee is secure. We want to make sure their family is secure. So we offer it out as just a benefit to our employees, but that's the reason why we did it. While we're still, you would think single sign-on would be everywhere. It's only been around, I think, since 1998. But we don't have all of our applications on single sign-on. And you would think a company like Fiserv would have single sign-on, but they don't. They just do an LDAP lookup, which is really irritating. So everything, password manager. But that was just one of the examples is that we found due to the behavior of our employees, okay, here's a problem. We're trying to teach everyone good cyber hygiene, and good cyber hygiene, you don't write down your password. I consider Microsoft Excel me writing down my password, and you might as well be keeping it underneath the keyboard, like some people used to do in the past. So that's one of the ways in which we do it. But there's so many other examples that you could use with user behavior analytics. I would love to hear from any of you if you have any use cases for user behavior analytics, or if you're even that far into your journey. I know many of you said you were at that, somewhat of I think of the mature aspect of the CSF. Where are you at with your UBA? I have not seen any Fred that are embedded in EDR, but there might be. CrowdStrike didn't have something like that. That's what we use for our EDR solution. They didn't have that. We utilize DTEX for this, and it's not cheap. But what it does do, because this is the part where I had to explain to the CEO and CFO, we've got documents that are moving all over the place, and we need to know if that document gets, let's just say, infected. Like this could be malware. We need to be able to see where it's going, because I'm worried about that lateral traffic. And while it may not be directly a UBA use case, to me, it's a way to minimize any threat that happens, because we can then stop. Like I could immediately, in that point where I see something from DTEX, I could then put that into EDR to block that particular magic type, or the magic byte on the file, which is specific to any type of document, JPEG file, you name it. And so you could get that into the EDR, which we could look at that as an indication of compromise or an IOC. So you could create that IOC so you could stop the spread. And this would go great, like in the event that there's a ransomware like environment. If you start to see it before it got everywhere, you could at least make it to where the impact isn't as high. So I would love to be able to get both of the tools to work together, but it's manual at the moment. But that's the use case I use in order to get it, because it's not a matter of if something like ransomware is going to happen. It's just a matter of when, because they're going to get something exploited, and how are we going to address it? Orchestrate store, so another place to put in there. Go ahead and do that. And I think that was the last slide. I happen to love our security orchestration automation. It takes up it makes our team a lot more efficient. So appreciate that, and happy to answer any other questions.
Well, I'll just step in real quick, and I just wanted to next tell you that Randy Laudermilk, he's our Vice President of Strategic Partnerships and Business Development. He's just going to wrap us up, and Randy brings over 20 years in cybersecurity experience, and he is our lead in the Saint product strategy and our partnerships and alliances. And Randy also holds a master's in information management, as well as he's a certified Scrum Master. So Randy, can you quick wrap us up?
Thanks, Diane. Well, first of all, Fred, Dr. Ford, thank you for your thoughts on these topics. the challenges, pain points, those type of things, threat landscape, it's very clear that cyber risk management is one of the most important programs for the continuity and success of the credit union operations, just not as us as professionals or compliance managers or type of things, but we're a critical component to the operations and the strategic direction of the companies that we serve. But I guess in terms of a wrap up, I'd just like to propose a question to the group. What are your biggest challenges and pain points? Particularly, I see that everyone's implementing the cybersecurity framework to some degree, mostly at a fairly mature level. But some of the challenges, pain points for getting that implemented. Also, what about the return on the investment? Are you seeing things like better insurance rates by having a framework implemented, competitive advantages, customer confidence? How is that communicated to show that security is a component part of your operations and caring for your customers? Also, improved board communication, as Dr. Ford mentioned, when you're having discussions about funding. Are you seeing those type of returns on the investment, not just from a tactical or technical level? So we welcome your experiences and your thoughts. And again, thank you very much for your time today.